Over the last 6 years, I've tried hundreds, possibly thousands of different boots, breaking them in, testing them out, and getting all kinds of different blisters. I'm not a doctor, but I do consider myself to be a blister expert. So in this video, I'm going to tell you how to never get blisters again. But you'll probably still get blisters again at some point. So will I. They happen sometimes. What's going on, guys? Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com, and welcome to Blisters 101. How a blister is caused, where you get the blister, and how to avoid them as best you can. Because believe it or not, blisters almost 100% of the time are your fault, not the boots that you're wearing, which is typically what people like to blame. So if you want to learn everything there is to know about blisters, please stick around because there's going to be some useful information here. If you guys end up enjoying the video, don't forget to support it with a like. And if you're new here watching for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. Let's start by understanding exactly how a blister is even caused in the first place. Now, blisters are typically caused by excessive friction, rubbing, if you will, and it's not something that happens instantaneously. It's something that happens over time. Some people can develop blisters in 2 minutes. Some people will take 2 hours to develop good blisters. There's no such thing as good blisters. Anyways, you usually get blisters once the skin has heated up a little bit and sweat is involved, because your feet are inevitably going to sweat while you're wearing soccer cleats. Once the skin gets a little bit moist, it's going to be softer. Along with that heat, with a little bit of rubbing, you're going to end up with some kind of a blister on the surface. Now, when it comes to soccer cleats, you can typically get blisters in all kinds of different spots. Everyone's gonna be a little bit different, but basically you can get blisters anywhere on your feet. The most common spots are going to be in the heel area. If it's lower in the heel, either off to the side or directly in the middle, not super important. It's generally caused because of some kind of slippage or rubbing at the back of the shoe, typically because 1, the shoes don't fit you properly, or 2, because they're a little bit too big. If they're too big, heel slippage is a very common issue and a very common reason why a lot of people end up with blisters. The blisters are still at the back of your foot, the heel area, but they're a little bit higher up, specifically where the top part of the heel area ends, whether it's a low cut shoe or a mid cut shoe, because the mid cut shoes still have some kind of structure at the back where it finally ends and then extends into a collar. That is typically, again, because the shoe is just rubbing your foot the wrong way. That's something that is usually going to happen only when the boots are brand new. And obviously when the shoes are new versus old, that's going to up your chances of getting a blister, because you're now having areas of your foot in contact with a very tight fitting shoe that wouldn't normally be in contact with anything. So it takes time for your body to essentially adjust. And during that adjustment period, it's going to be much more vulnerable to a blister just because the skin is much softer and not quite as well worn, if that makes any sense. It's also worth noting that you can get blisters in boots that are already broken in. Obviously, it's going to be more likely if they're brand new, the materials are stiffer, and your feet just aren't used to the way that they fit and feel. But if your shoes are already broken in, depending on the weather conditions, depending on your feet that day, depending on the socks that you're wearing, you can still develop blisters. Often, if you start getting blisters all of a sudden, especially if they're older boots, that's a good sign that your boots have actually worn out a little bit and it's probably time for a brand new pair. Not always, but something to keep in mind. If you've ever noticed when you get a blister in one specific spot, once that blister has healed, usually you don't get a blister in that same spot for a very long time, mainly because the body has adjusted itself once it has healed properly to not get a blister in that same spot. Of course, if the boots are just slipping way too much or something is wrong, you can still get a blister there, but it's a lot less likely to happen once you've had a blister once. Aside from the heel, getting blisters in the forefoot and toe area is also fairly common, either on the ball of the forefoot, on either side of the big toe or the pinky toe, even the bottom of the big toe are very common spots for blisters as well. And those can be caused by a variety of different reasons. One being, of course, slippage inside of the shoes, if they're a little bit too big or just don't fit you properly, especially when they're brand new. If there's any kind of stitching or some kind of a rough spot, even if it doesn't seem that rough, if it's on the inside of the shoe and your foot's not used to it, it can actually cause a blister over time when you're breaking them in. Also, slippage on the insole can lead to blisters as well, even if the shoes seem to fit you properly, because there's always going to be some level of slippage, even if your foot feels really, really secure. This can also be caused by your socks. If the socks don't grip your feet that well, or if the sock is slipping on the base of the insole, that can lead to excessive slippage. Even if you're wearing grip socks, that little bit of slippage that's always going to be there no matter what can still lead to a blister. So there really is no way to 100% avoid blisters with any form of equipment, whether that's grip socks, grip insoles, or anything else. Another thing that I personally struggle with is across the top of my toes, generally where you have the seam for a pair of socks. Over time, during a playing session, that little bit of a change in texture, a little bit of roughness from the stitch can often lead to kind of not so much a blister, but more so a cut, a ripping of the skin across the top of your toes along the knuckle. Again, this is going to vary from person to person, but not too uncommon. That usually though is caused by your socks and not so much your boots. Those are the most common spots for blisters and excessive rubbing, but you can get blisters just about anywhere on your foot. It's very much dependent on your feet specifically, the sensitivity of your skin, the boots you're wearing, and how those boots actually fit. That's what's going to determine where you're going to get a blister, how often you're going to get blisters, and how likely you are to get blisters. So we all know how to get blisters, but how do you avoid them? And this kind of circles back to what I said at the start of this video. The main cause of blisters is yourself. And the reason for that is once you start to get a blister, you always know it. Blisters are not something that just pop up out of nowhere and all of a sudden start to hurt really bad. They kind of start, you feel a little bit of discomfort, then it gets slightly worse and slightly worse and slightly worse to the point where, oh my gosh, I need to take these off. They feel horribly uncomfortable, and I very clearly have a blister on my heel, on my toe, wherever it may be. And the reason why you got that blister is because you endured the pain long enough to actually give yourself a blister. And this really is the struggle when it comes to blisters, is that while they're developing during your playing session, however long it might be, usually the pain is not so bad that you can't just play through it. It's not until the next day, once the blister has time to swell up a little bit and your body realizes, oh my gosh, this does not feel good, and you try to put the boots back on and play again, then it hurts 10 times worse, and you now have a legitimate injury that's gonna take at least a week to heal up properly, and even then, it's still gonna hurt a little bit. Sometimes, if you get a bad enough blister, it's gonna be a 2 to 3 week injury until your feet feel normal, or at least you can wear your boots comfortably, because once you finally have that blister, that's when the recovery time really starts. The issue is the time that it takes to actually develop the blister doesn't hurt quite as much as the time after once it starts to heal. So that is why so many people end up with blisters, even though they were totally avoidable, and avoiding the blister is the key. So ultimately, the best way to avoid a blister is not to let it happen in the first place. And I know it sucks, it's not a very tough guy thing to do, but we all know what the early stages of a blister feels like. So if you're in a training session and you feel those early stages of a blister coming on, that slight bit of discomfort that you know is only gonna get worse over time, stop your training session, take the boots off, and take a break. Wait till the next day and start again, because trust me when I say avoiding that blister and just starting fresh the next day is much better than getting a serious blister and then having to deal with it for 2 to 3 weeks and being in complete discomfort and really just not being able to play because you wanted to tough it out through that particular session just because you didn't want to stop. So what I personally like to do, and I realize that this isn't a reality for everyone, is whether it's a training session or a match, if I'm going to play at all, I always bring 2 pairs with me. The pair that I want to wear and then a backup pair that I know 100% will totally be comfortable for me. It's pre-broken in. I know I'm not gonna have any issues if worse comes to worse. So if I'm wearing that initial pair and I feel the early stages of a blister coming on, I can take them off, put on my backup pair, and continue my session without any issues with discomfort and further developing those early stages of a blister. With that in mind, depending on which spot is feeling the early stages of a blister coming on, even when you put on your backup pair, you might still feel that. If that's the case, just stop the session entirely, let your feet dry up, and avoid the blisters. Trust me when I say that's the best way to do this. In the case of playing through blisters in a match, obviously that's a little bit of a different situation. If it's a very important match and you are feeling those early stages of a blister coming on, but you don't want to come off, If you choose to play through that, that's perfectly understandable. I have done that plenty of times as well. And that's kind of something that you kind of just have to deal with. Blisters aren't 100% avoidable specifically for that reason. Something that I will advise though is if you do have brand new boots, not a good idea to wear them for the first time, even the first couple of times in a match, especially if you're going to be playing the entire 90 minutes, because that means that if you do get the early stages of a blister, you're probably not going to have the opportunity to swap them out. So you will end up with a blister at the end of the match inevitably. Some people can wear new boots straight into a match and not have any issues at all. Again, everyone's gonna be a little bit different, but if at all possible, break in your new boots before wearing them in a match to where you're perfectly confident that you can wear them without having any discomfort issues. So that pretty much sums up blisters. It's a self-inflicted injury that is totally avoidable, but because the early stages of blisters aren't that painful, often we endure the pain to the point where the blisters are significantly worse, and then you end up with an injury that's gonna take 2 to 3 weeks to heal, and it's just a pain that nobody wants to deal with. So if you can avoid it, just avoid it. If you feel the early stages of a blister, just stop and you won't get a blister. That's pretty much it for this one, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to support it with a like. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask them down below in the comments, and I'll do my best to get an answer out to you as soon as I possibly can. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all my social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.